The Commodore Amiga was a special machine. It was the first real step toward affordable multimedia home computing, and the community that sprung up around it had such a cool, unique sense of style that it feels like, even today, you can spot the work of an Amigan from a mile away. The original A1000, released in 1985, was pretty expensive, well outside the budget of all but the upperest of middle-class families, but the Amiga 500, released 2 years later in 1987, was much cheaper, much more competitive with its contemporaries, and it brought with it a level of audiovisual fidelity that blew almost every other platform at the time out of the water. The impressive specs of the Amiga and the aesthetic sensibilities of the scene came together in a big way to produce some truly beautiful software that would influence homebrew developers, crack drum makers, electronic musicians, and demo sceners for decades to come. While Diskmags were not exclusive to the Amiga, it is the machine with the most interesting library, the one with the most diverse range of subjects and the most powerful vibes, at least in my opinion, which is the only opinion that matters. So what the hell is a Diskmag? Well, it's a magazine, published on a floppy disk. While there were a few professionally published Diskmags out there, especially in the States for stuff like Softdisk's Lodestar for the C64, most Diskmags were essentially fanzines as software, or maybe it's better to think of them as fan sites that you got in the mail. Either way, they were amateur publications distributed via computer storage media, and in the Euro scene at least, there was a huge focus on making them as audio-visually interesting as possible. It's all about the vibes, baby. They could cover a pretty wide range of subjects, but a majority of them were linked to the scene, which I'm using here to refer to the demo scene, the art scene, and the wares scene all at once. Because for a long time, they were all kind of the same thing, the former two essentially being less legally dubious outgrowths of the latter. Let's start with a scene that acts as kind of a Rosetta Stone for the medium, one of the most popular mags in the UK scene, and one of the only Diskmags that has an English Wikipedia article. Bloody Anglocentrism. Grapevine by LSD ran for about 4 years, and would eventually go on to feature basically every kind of article a Diskmag could feature. Scene news, game reviews, op-eds, and even short stories. Holy shit, they published Day of the Barney! Does this count as an early creepypasta? Grapevine was, as discussed, primarily a scene magazine. Most of the articles were party reports, interviews with prominent sceners, news and rumours about who joined what group and who failed their driving test, I guess. There was also a secret article in each issue, beginning with the 8th, comprising further correspondences from members of LSD to each other and to other members of the scene. Feet, guys. Some of the stuff in these articles really surprised me. Like, the sheer scale of this Crusaders party. Look at these prizes! That shit was expensive. Turns out that a lot of scene groups were actually pretty large organizations with different divisions in different countries all around the world. They had the resources to hire out these huge venues with catering and accommodation and prizes, and even online components all the way back in 1992. Granted, online in this case means a bulletin board system which only one person can be logged into at a time, but still. You know, since so many of these groups were, and are in some cases, involved in cracking and distributing commercial software, this technically makes them international criminal gangs, like some kind of nerd mafia. My favourite articles tend to be the ones with very little direct connection to the scene though. The reviews, the op-eds, the short stories. It's like reading old posts on a long-dead forum. I mean, check this one out. Waxing nostalgic about the halcyon days of the ZX Spectrum, back when people cared more about gameplay than fancy 32-color graphics. Oh, fuck. This one from the final issue, this shit is so sweet it damn near made me cry. It's about the author getting into skateboarding after it was finally legalized in Norway at the end of the 80s. About how it shaped his life going forward, and how the people he met will always be a part of him, even as they drift apart on the river of time. It reminds me of my teenage years, spent screaming in metal bands, going to local shows, and meeting people who would change the way I saw the world forever. I remember we used to sneak onto the roof of this multi-story car park in the city centre, blasting our shitty demo tracks out of our shitty phone speakers and jamming away on filthy old guitars until the sun set. I met a lot of wonderful people back then, but As the years have gone on and life has gotten busier, they've slowly filtered out of my life one by one. So it goes, I suppose. But I'll always treasure the time that we spent together, and the warmth of those memories helped to keep the cold at bay during the long, listless hours of the graveyard shift. So, how the hell did you get a hold of these things anyway? It's not like Diskmags was sold at your local Woolworths. Well, one of the best ways to get hold of any hobbyist software back in the early days of computing was the public domain library. Distributors like 17-bit software would send out disks loaded with programs created by nerds in their bedrooms just like you, for little more than the cost of postage in the floppy disk. They advertised themselves in the pages of popular print magazines, and their catalogs often, though not always, came on discs too. Those same print mags would even review some of the more prominent PD software, letting you know that the shit was out there. You also had licenseware, which most people still referred to as PD software, but it was distinct in that it was very much not in the public domain. Authors retained copyright to their work, and copying licenseware discs and distributing them for free was against the law. One of the most popular and widely used licenseware utilities was a Diskmag creation tool, in fact. I have a rival one here that I really need to dig into. Let me know if you'd be interested in seeing me stream it. Not everyone in the scene was necessarily happy about PD software houses though. Some scene releases opened with messages openly disparaging the PD houses, and claiming they had no right to add their releases to their catalogs. This isn't just gatekeeping, though there is an element of that from some groups. Rather that there were a few less than scrupulous PD houses out there that would list scene releases without permission, and would add on some extra service charges so that they could make a profit. Naturally, none of this money went to the groups who actually produced the software, though given how many of these groups were engaged in piracy, not everybody was sympathetic. And it's worth noting that some mags were happy for PD houses to sell their stuff so long as they weren't ripping people off. Most scene groups, though, had dedicated swappers whose job it was to distribute the group's wares in exchange for the latest releases from their contemporaries. Obviously cracked software, games especially, were the real hot shit, but demos, music discs, and Diskmags were all exchanged this way too. A good swapper could have contacts across the continent, across the world even, and they were a major part of what kept the international scene connected to each other before the internet came to people's homes. Obviously, it would have been pretty fucking expensive to send correspondences to all of your contacts individually. There was no way around it when it came to mailing discs, so a lot of people turned to stamp faking, where you would send your mail out with transparent glue on top of the stamp so that they could be reused in the future. A less risky strategy was simply mailing discs with fewer stamps than was legally required, because postmen are not cops, and 99% of the time it would get through the post anyway. But both of these were risky, the latter still cost money, and sometimes you just wanted to catch up, shoot the shit, ask where the fuck your new discs are, or offer an explanation for a late delivery. It was a lot cheaper to centralize that shit. Most Diskmags, like the fanzines before them, had letters sections that acted as public forums for their community, full of posts from folks talking to other members of the scene rather than the magazine. Obviously there were bulletin board systems, and much like with the Post, there were ways to get around long-distance call charges in order to connect to systems outside of your dialing area. But while they were important and widely used, not everybody had a modem or the know-how for phreaking, and it was important to keep everyone up to date. But while BBSs were not a convenient enough technology to completely replace the postal service as a form of casual communication, like the internet would go on to be, they were still an extremely important part of the scene, both as a meeting place for the community and as a form of file sharing. But modems back then, they were not quick, and many BBSs demanded payment, recompense, for tying up their phone line with your downloading. It was common courtesy to repay the community by uploading wares of your own, and many early demo scene productions began as a way to essentially pay for cracked games. Besides modem trading and mail trading, there were also copy parties, where sceners would meet up in person to trade discs with each other. These seemed to be pretty low-key affairs in the early days of the scene, and were mostly about making copies of your newly purchased games for your friends, or your customers in the playground. As the scene grew and the demo and art scenes gained more prominence, copy parties would eventually evolve into demo parties, where the scene's elite groups would unveil their latest releases, competing against each other to see who could make the coolest shit. And let me tell you, these things are events. These demos were, and are, pretty much the most sophisticated software to ever get made for these old platforms. And being there for the premiere of a multi-loading mega demo is truly something special. Demos, for those unaware, are essentially a kind of software-driven music video that has its roots in the fancy intros you sometimes see at the start of cracked software or in key generators. You know the kind I'm talking about, don't you fucking lie to me. They own, and there is nothing like sitting at your desk, bathed in the soft glow of your TV, being serenaded by the beeps and whirs of the disk drive as it loads an ethereal piece of animation that shows off just how much better your machine is than your friend's stupid fucking Atari. 'Cause yeah, in addition to the crack tros and the trading, a lot of early demo coders were motivated by a lack of available software that really showed off what their fancy new computers could do. As a result, people started to compete to get the coolest shit they could out of these machines. Demos are about more than just showing off your coding skills though. It's not enough to be technically impressive, it also has to be interesting. It needs style, it needs artistry, and it needs to have a banging soundtrack. It sounds silly, but there are some demos that I've genuinely found to be straight up moving, where the combination of visuals and music and even poetry has stirred something within me. This shit is art, and I'd highly recommend seeking some of it out even if you're not the type to be impressed by pure technical wizardry. As one coder put it, we could really start experimenting with all sorts of stuff that made non-computer people turn their heads. If you were both skilled and lucky enough, people might vote for your group's productions in one of the many scene charts. The most prominent one in the Amiga scene, as far as I can tell, was the official Euro chart, originally run by Crusaders and later by Static Bytes. It was, despite Crusaders' protests, basically a disc magazine, quickly adding news and party report segments to accompany the charts as well as a god-awful joke section. Unlike some of the other chart discs around, anyone could vote in the Euro chart, not just the scene's elite. Making the charts meant that you really hit the big time in your field, and it could open up a ton of opportunities for you in the scene. Who wouldn't want the best Amiga musician in Europe to work on their demo, or their game? I bet it would also look pretty good on your CV or portfolio or university application or whatever. I'm being serious, making a moderately well-liked Pac-Man clone where you ate human beings instead of dots for an obscure forum in the 2000s legitimately helped me land a job once. It shows ambition and work ethic or some shit like that. Getting voted as one of the very best coders or artists or whatever in an international scene, that's a genuine accomplishment. Demo aesthetics bled over into all kinds of other software over time, with prominent game developers like Thalion and DICE, yes that DICE, being founded by members of the demo scene. Even some of the more mundane and utilitarian software was often designed with an eye for style. Look at how fucking cool this disc copying software looks. They're some of my favourites in the music discs. While there were quite a few with very basic menus or that just straight up had you typing commands into Amiga DOS, a good number went above and beyond. Amazing Tunes 2 from Share and Enjoy has some of the most impressive transparency effects I've ever seen in any Amiga program of this era, and this focus on cool, colourful and elaborate presentation is a major part of what makes Diskmags so fun to peruse too, even decades removed from their journalistic relevance. This is Aggression. Look at the frame, the fonts. The subject matter is super appealing to me too. It was originally supposed to be two separate magazines, one called Necronomicon, dealing with metal and horror fiction and all that good stuff, and the other called Aggression, focused on the Amiga scene, but they ultimately decided to combine the two in order to reach a wider audience. Some of the actual writing here, though, is This article about girls in the scene is hilarious. Like, fuck dude, I wonder why there ain't more girls around. This genre of article was weirdly common in disc magazines. Did you know that some demo parties even had free entry for women in order to try and boost the numbers? This interview with a black metal band called Denial of God is a ride, too. The dude is trying so hard to be shocking and offensive and evil. It's hilarious. Down with fun. Still, I don't want to rag too much on the dumbass opinions of teenagers from 30 fucking years ago. Not that some of this shit was okay even by the standards of the time. It's more that young metalheads are got a young metalhead, and saying stupid shit for shock value was kind of a rite of passage in that scene, even right up until I was a teenager in the 2000s. I'm sure they've grown and changed. Right? Plus, some of the stuff here does display some genuine empathy. The magazine's take on appropriate criticism is genuinely great, and I'm not just showing you this so that you won't be mean to me. Hang on. They said what about gay people? Jesus fucking Christ. It's also kind of surreal reading someone reacting to the Mayhem and Varg shit as it was happening. I was only a babby when Euronymous was sent to the next dimension, so I've only seen retrospectives on the shit that went down back then. But this was written by a dude who was part of the Norwegian metal scene during that time, and it's so strange to see such a candid contemporary response. I really gotta grab some print scenes from back then, huh? I genuinely really fuck with the enthusiasm on display here. I can't say with my whole chest that the writing is particularly good, or the content particularly mature, but it's passionate and earnest, and those are the seeds from which quality eventually grows. It's also just kind of fun to read material that's so unfiltered, so confidently amateurish. Like, check out the short story here in the first issue, The Haunting. I had a blast reading this thing. It has all of the unnecessary exclamation marks of an old comic book, and just kind of reads like you're 17 again, sitting around an illegal campfire while your greasiest friend regales you with tales of gore and violence that are just that bit too over the top to be taken seriously. It's a lot of fun in a things that are bad can be better than things that are good sort of way. If you want stories that take themselves a little more seriously though, you need to check out the mags dedicated to that. I'm particularly fond of the trio of magnetic fiction, dark fiction, and dark portal because I'm an edgy bitch. But we should start with their progenitor, the Quartermass Experiment. So first of all, check out the fucking UI. I'm pretty sure the buttons are all Mandelbrot sets, which is both the coolest and nerdiest thing I've ever seen. The mag is a successor to an old fanzine called Complex, which I have basically no knowledge of. Based on the introductory article, it may simply be lost media. They struggled to even get it printed, which is part of what led to them deciding to make a disc magazine in the first place. That way, interested parties could simply mail empty floppies for them to copy the mag to, reducing the cost of printing and distribution down to the cost of postage. Outside of the stories themselves, the tone of this first issue is pretty lighthearted. Lots of silly editor infighting in the parentheses of the article, which is something I sort of miss about 90s and the 2000s enthusiast press in general. And a lot of the articles have kind of an old web forum energy to them. Console owners are so stupid, huh? Let's have a look. Hardware more expensive, but the games are cheaper. You can do more than just game on an Amiga. These are the exact same arguments people were making for PC gaming in the 2000s. Fuck, it's the same ones they're making today. Time is a flat fucking circle. The second issue has a somewhat more serious, more mature tone to it, but it keeps a lot of those enthusiast elements I mentioned earlier, just without so much of the dumb format wars shit. There's a part in the introductory article about submitting stories to the mag that is some genuinely solid advice for anyone looking to pick up a creative skill. Perfect is the enemy of done, and having work that you can reflect on will do so much to help you figure out what you need to do to improve in the future. I also really enjoyed On the Run from this issue. It's a neat little cyberpunk short about a guy whose dick costs him his job. And while it's not critiquing 20th century capitalism, it's definitely the kind of cyberpunk that's more interested in the genre's aesthetic than its themes. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. If William Gibson and Ridley Scott wanted us to take cyberpunk seriously, they wouldn't have made it so cool. I wish the rain-soaked high-tech low-life dystopia that I lived in looked this vibey. Instead, I have to live in fucking Britain. One of the contributors, Andrew Campbell, would eventually split off and start his own Diskmags. The three darker mags I mentioned earlier, all three focused more on horror and contemporary fiction than sci-fi, and largely excising the game reviews and editorials entirely. Dark Fiction 1 has probably my favourite menu graphics out of any Diskmag. It is so good! The twisting bones of the skeletons and trees beautifully frame the image accompanying each story, and the perched demon staring into your eyes from beyond the monitor is just makes my gay little goth heart sing. As if the UI wasn't cool enough, Miracle of Life from this issue might be my favourite story published in any of these mags so far. It's very short, weighing in at just 1200 words, but it hit me straight in the heart. It's about the stresses and complications of farm life, the bonds formed between human and animal, and how you can do everything right but still have everything go wrong. Highly recommended. I didn't see any of these magazines in the chart discs I checked out, though they did seemingly get good reviews from the print mags. They seem to exist outside of the demo scene, which would explain their absence despite their quality. Campbell was a major contributor to the Amiga's public domain though, authoring tons of acclaimed games and utilities in addition to disc magazines. His Black Dawn series of dungeon crawlers received a sequel just last year in fact. Excellent shit. Some of the other mags I checked out also existed in their own little space, like The Final Frontier, a Star Trek fanzine which explicitly mentions a desire to improve the graphics in order to appeal to the demo scene and hit a wider audience. Some issues of this thing do look pretty great, and it was kind of nice to see a full-on traditional sci-fi fanzine in this format. I'm sure there are others, but my searches for Star Wars and Lord of the Rings Diskmags on the Amiga turned up nothing. While the scene was an important part of computer culture back then, a major part of what gives the era its character, they didn't make up the majority of computer users, and it's only natural that people outside of it would also figure out that you could use software to keep your community connected and share creative work with each other. Demo productions, PD Soft, and disc magazines would continue to be released right up to the end of the Amiga's commercial life and even beyond. But the coming of the web and the death of Commodore in 1994 would signal the end of the scene for most of the Amiga's disc mags. And while many Amigans continue to fight the good fight, even to this day, most moved on to other machines eventually. There's a real sense of finality in many of the mags from this period. Grapevine's final issue has this air of bittersweet nostalgia about it. The background music has such a wistful tone, and so many of the articles seem to be reminiscing about days gone by. It's probably because the mag's longtime editor, Paza, was set to leave, but while his replacements would write excitedly about their plans for the future, and that future would never come. While printed zines continue to thrive, Diskmags as a whole would struggle to survive the 90s, and as the web's multimedia capabilities began to catch up with what you could do with an app in the 2000s, most people would pivot to building websites and making videos to share their passions with the community. But while their practical value may have diminished, Diskmags retain their aesthetic value. They are, like the zine before and the website after them, a form of self-expression, just as valuable as art as they are as mediums for sharing art. And that's why they still exist, I think. You may not be getting them in the post anymore, and they may not give you the most up-to-date news, but the Diskmag lives on, as one of the coolest ways to share our thoughts with the communities that we love. You know, most of this stuff is a little before my time. I was born in 1991. I wasn't there for most of the Amiga's life. I wanted one ever since I was a little kid though, and at the end of last year I finally bought myself a fully kitted out Amiga 1200 and I love it so much. While I'm glad I was born when I was, I feel such strong anemoia for this era of computing, for the intentionality that comes with things like BBSs and Diskmags. Modern computing is so fast-paced, always pinging you from one distraction to the next. It feels nice to return to a time when you had to focus on one or two things. And I'm grateful that all of these Diskmags have been archived so well. Without the hard work of preservationists like the ones you're seeing on screen right now, all of these stories, these memories, would have been lost forever. I made this video about disc magazines instead of music discs or demos or PD games because they're more than just cool, they're more than just art, they're a historical record. Pictures of a time, painted with the words of those who were living it.